Very important, how long? How long can your talk be? And also, how much time do you have to prepare it? Sometimes it will be a compromise between the two. However, no matter how much time you have, if you are given X minutes, you have to reach your conclusions in X minutes. That's, in general, with time, you'll become maybe more confident. Also, with preparing your talk, you'll manage to adapt your talk to your goal without wasting time. So you become more efficient. But in general, it's your job to ask in advance, how much time do you have? Decide in advance how long you can spend on the introduction, on the development, on the conclusions, because you can make a brilliant 5-minute talk, 10-minute talk, 30-minute talk, 1-hour talk, it doesn't matter. But it's your job to adapt your talk to the time that you have available. Ask for a warning if you want, if that helps you, or check the time during your talk to make sure that you can actually adapt to the time you have. In particular, there are some things that I would advise you not to do. For example, please don't complain about the lack of time. Sometimes we hear speakers saying, I've been only given a 10-minute talk, I've been only given a 20-minute talk, a 30-minute talk. So first of all, that might be other people in the audience who have been given less time than you. In any case, you are supposed to know that in advance and again, adapt your talk to that format, whatever that is. If you're still in your introduction after a third, let's say, of your time, that's not a good sign. Because imagine it's a bit like if you were watching a movie and after half an hour, 40 minutes, nothing has happened yet, and there's only the main characters who have been introduced, and you're still waiting for something to happen, you probably get bored and just, stop or switch to another movie. You have to, again, divide your storyline within the time that you have. Also, not advisable, things like, time is up, so I'll talk faster, or time is up, so I'll go fast on all the remaining 20 slides. Or even worse, chair tells me that the time is up, but I'll continue anyway. So these are not things that are advisable to do. And I think if you only have 5 minutes left to the end of your talk and you still have several slides, then going fast through all the plots, all the slides, all the caveats, that's another plot, that's another result, it's not going to help. In fact, it's only going to annoy your audience, and even worse, it's going to make them aware that you screwed up your talk. So it shouldn't happen. But if it does, keep control. Skip the slides entirely and just say your final message so that at least the audience will retain that one. So my tip would be define at the start how much time each part of your talk should last, how many slides per topic you can have, and share your time in the slides. Also when you're preparing them, because you don't want to end up in the situations in which you have maybe 4, 3, 5 brilliant slides, and then the quality of the talk just drops down because you didn't have time to prepare them. So let's move on to what. Now we know who we are talking, where we are talking, how long we have to talk, but what are we actually going to say? So think about, from the start, about your keywords. Identify what you want to say and also what you don't want to say, which is equally important. Make sure that you give your message, the key message, at the start, at the end, and whenever you can within the talk. It's a bit like telling a story. And usually, a standard outline when you tell a story would include an introduction, a build-up, and conclusions. The more you get familiar with that and experience with giving talks, then maybe the more you would like to test some outlines or storytelling which are less standard. But I would advise to at least be first very confident with a standard outline before playing, especially depending on the situation. But I would test less maybe in a situation in which I have to give an interview for a job, and maybe you can do a bit more tests with your voice, with your design, with the storytelling in situations in which are more, say, friendly. Okay, so usually your story starts with the introduction. That's the part when you first have to capture attention. So explain in one sentence what your talk is about and what you're aiming at. You have to avoid very long sentence. You need to capture the attention now and not in 100 words. What's the state of the art? What's the problem that you really want to address? That's the part where you introduce your characters, the main topics, the main keywords. And then afterwards, there is the development. Your characters evolve. Maybe there's a new idea, maybe there's a new approach. You'll describe your results, you'll build up tension with examples, data, maybe a plot. Try to make it interesting. Did you encounter new problems along the way that maybe you were not expecting at the start? Was there a twist in your research? Maybe you had the first attempt that partially worked and you went to a meeting, you talked to other people, you had an epiphany and understood how you could actually solve your initial problem. Make it interesting also in the story that you're telling. And try to test attention and maybe adapt to your audience. From time to time, try to recall where your story is before moving to the next step. Finally, conclusions. In conclusions, you give your key message again. And again, as I had mentioned before, you highlight contrast. In which way is the ending of your story different from your start, from the way in which the story began? What did you learn along the way? Are there new open questions that you were not aware of at the beginning? What works now that was not working when you started that project? Did you acquire new skills, learn something new? Did you publish a new code, a new result? Don't conclude just because the time is up. You put the slide there and say, well, read it. Enjoy your conclusions. That's the moment also, and along with the whole your talk, in which you're transferring your enthusiasm. And if you're not enthusiastic about your work, or if you're not interested in what you're saying, then nobody will. One remark about jokes, since we also mentioned it before, fun can be good. However, is it funny? You want to avoid being in awkward situations, like as a speaker, you say a joke and, well, you laugh by yourself. Or as an audience, you laugh at a joke that, well, I recognize that's bad, but actually, let me just please the speaker. This is awkward, and I would really, advise to avoid that. Jokes can be very cultural dependent and actually at the end high risk. In a professional context, there's a lot of jokes that are not advisable to do. In general, that sounds trivial, but I'm sure that all of us have heard some of that. Humiliating people, humiliating colleagues, students, groups of people is not a good idea and should not be done. When I was preparing this, I asked also for feedback to lots of people or colleagues, and I think actually everyone independently could remember very bad jokes, but nobody could actually remember any good jokes that they had heard in a talk. So remember that you're not talking to yourself. You're not giving a talk to yourself. You're talking to people with their professional, personal histories, cultures, beliefs, difficulties, about which usually you know very little. So if in doubt, just avoid it. There are also many more ways to add fun to your talks. You can consider instead playing with design, with voice, and also with your storytelling. So for example, I remember still one talk that it was a public outreach sort of TEDx talk about a person who had to discuss about all his achievements and what he had been doing in life. And he went through his talk first and he explained all his successes, how he had achieved many, many things in his life. And then halfway through his talk, suddenly he stopped and he said, well, that's one version of this story. However, I can also tell you another version of the same story. And he went back to the first slide and went again through exactly the same slides, telling a completely different story. While the first part was all on his achievements and successes, the second story that he told us with exactly the same slides was about all the difficulties and challenges that he had encountered all through his life. So that made it super interesting, actually, and I think I certainly remember that person and that talk. So let's move on how do you realize all that? So we have seen a bit in the storyline, there's much more than that in a talk. How do you capture attention? You can do that through a lot of things, through text, through images, through speech, your voice and body language. And usually your audience will be mixed. There will be someone that will hear what you're saying, someone else that would actually really prefer to read, some others that will, where's the plot? We'll be looking for an image, a picture. So typically you will want to give all three elements, a bit to everyone.